I mean, that's a big part of the work, right? Is based on our visibility, what's the earliest we can find identifiable, trackable patterns in this activity? And sometimes it means that we actually end up, for example, birding some of this delivery activity, like Saffron Starling is a good example. We saw a consistent delivery methodology, but multiple payloads delivered. So we called that Saffron Starling for our own tracking. So we could get as early as possible in that execution chain.
All right. I do think it's time. So without further ado, we will jump into what has become one of my very favorite recurring office hour features, which is the appearance of Stef Rand. Second to Stef's appearance is actually hearing about Intel Insights. So thank you so much for joining us again, Stef.
I'm very happy to be here. I always look forward to this, and I can't believe it's office hours number 30. That's really flippin' cool.
Like every week is some different milestone depending on what type of division you do or what the date
It's
is.
like the number increases every week, but when you get around one like 30, that's pretty good. But we are going to have to celebrate 32 because it's like 100,000 in binary or something like that.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, the mailman. All right, this week on the docket. So we're going to go through Intel Insights as always. And so we'll kind of walk through, we'll take a quick look at top threats and a couple of key takeaways from our team. And then Steph's got a really cool kind of, I'd say like offshoot of that, which is understanding precursor activity in general. But I think like with some specific examples that are really relevant to like how we look at this month over month. And I'd say like just how close so many things come to being really, really prevalent and just kind of underscoring the importance of putting a fine point on kind of how to like spot this stuff and detect it and deal with it early. So
Absolutely.
So without further ado, we're gonna take a look at our top 10. So for those of you who haven't caught this on the blog yet. All right, Steph, take us away. What do you want us to know? What's interesting here?
So you can go ahead and I think go to the first pop-up, which is the NetSupport Manager is at number 1. And this is the first time that NetSupport Manager has been at the very top of the list. It's been in the top 10 quite a bit, enough that it was actually our number 7 threat for all of 2024 because it's such a popular payload for Scarlet Goldfinch, for other kind of preceding activity, and also just as its own tool that's being dropped on systems. But yeah, so we saw enough of it last month for it to be at number 1 for the first time, timed with Amber Albatross. And I'll give Cleanup Loader a shout out. Last month was its first appearance and it stayed at number 3, which is pretty interesting. So that carried over from last month.
Ah, very cool. Yeah, I didn't realize it. That's right. I didn't realize it was it's so new to the top 10 as it was.
Yeah, last month was its debut. And then the other shout out that I want to give before we get into some of the fun weeds, which is that Lumacy 2 is not only back in the top 10, but it's back in the top 5. So this is actually the same level of activity that we saw it at before the takedown. So yeah, Lumacy 2, we had a quiet couple of months, and since then, I don't want to speculate about why this is. I will say I do know that you could buy the Luma source code before the takedown, and there was infrastructure in certain countries that was not taken down as part of the takedown operation. And so whether this is kind of rebuilding of other infrastructure, leveraging the infrastructure that did not get taken down, regardless, Luma C2 activity is back up again where we saw it before pre-takedown.
It may be one of the most disheartening things of all these takedowns, and I'd say like in kind of big disruptions, right? Is like not asking you to speculate, but I think it's like whether a lot of the you hear about ransomware groups, they get taken down, or there's some sort of like big interdiction, and then they kind of like it's like a hydra, they just kind of like reappear, whether it's like new people, same infrastructure, whether it's just a rebrand. And so it sounds like this is very much like in that same vein, right? Where these things are like deceivingly difficult to like swing the axe and make them go away forever. That doesn't really happen often, if at all.
It doesn't happen too often. I think Qbot is a really wonderful exception, Operation Duck Hunt, one of my favorites in the last few years. But I also, because I am aggressively optimistic, I like to think of it as, first of all, it does cause some kind of time cost, opportunity cost for them. And it removes the evil they would have done in the meantime, right? So not only do they have to rebuild that infrastructure, their momentum, get that back going again, but it also protected all the people that they would have been able to harm in the intervening time. So even if the threats do kind of creep back up again, I still think that these operations are super valuable and really wonderful to see.
Yeah.
Are we doing, is anyone doing any tracking of how quickly they come back and whether they're those actors are moving into the infrastructure as code world so that like a takedown is quicker to recover from than it used to be?
I think it would depend on the threat. That would be a really interesting article. It would be kind of interesting to take a look back over the different takedowns that have happened over, say, the last 5, 10 years and see sort of the return rates. But I don't have any of that data on hand, so I'm
Right.
not.
Well, I wonder how much of of having to rebuild has to do with getting domains and infrastructure with a certain amount of decent reputation before they put it into service.
Mhm.
It may not be that the long pole is actually setting up the infrastructure itself.
Very true.
Yeah, definitely like the as a service ecosystem not doing us any favors on the Defender side for sure. But I like your optimism is definitely is warranted, and like that is a great way to look at it. Like there's a lot of harm not done, even if these things are only out of commission for a few months. So that
Mhm.
it's a terrific silver lining. So now shifting gears a little bit, want to talk about like this kind of framing of like what's not in the top 10 and
Mhm.
why, right? So like how we describe the things and the importance of understanding the things that like aren't showing up on this leaderboard month over month.
Mhm.
Even though I think a lot of these have been on the leaderboard and or will be in the future, but I think, kind of where they sit relative to these attack chains is important. So like talk to us a little bit about how you think about like precursor activity in general.
Sure thing. So my background is in research before I came into cybersecurity, which is one of the reasons why I love Intel so much. And I'm very big on how we rearrange the data, the context of the data we present is important to share. And we try really hard to be transparent about that. So for our top 10, we've already talked a lot about how we do our best to remove testing without making assumptions about the things that are not marked as testing. And one of the other things we do is we try to very clearly draw the line between things that drop evil onto a system and the payloads themselves. We talked about that a lot with Qbot when there were some pretty clear initial access brokers like TA570 and TA577 that were doing the delivery. I had campaign IDs we could pin to specific actors, but sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can just say, hey, here are these loaders, and then we can determine they would have led to a particular payload. But since that payload technically did not get deployed, we caught it and stopped it before the payload appeared on the endpoint, we refer to that as precursor activity. And we mark it as such, and it does not appear in our top 10 because our top 10 is for threats that we have seen in customer environments, if that makes sense. And so what we do is we look at initial access, and that includes a wide variety of tactics like you've mentioned here. We talk about paste and run a lot, phishing, all of those different initial access vectors. And then we try to figure out as early as we can what association can we make to a thing. Sometimes we can determine what loader is used. So like hijack loader, we've talked about a lot in the last few months. So we could confirm, yes, hijack loader was on an endpoint, and so we're including that as non-precursor activity. We had a lot of hijack loader activity that then had precursor activity for additional payloads. So when we can stop a threat, but we're pretty sure with a high level of confidence, more than pretty sure, that it would have gone on to deliver an identifiable payload for our own purposes, we like to track that. And like I said, we mark it as that precursor activity. So we have these 3 additional threats that we saw this past month that would have been in the top 10 if there were, if they had been allowed to continue, if we had not kind of stopped them before they could get to that identifiable, trackable payload.
So when you and is it one of the things that, you know, when we kind of look at these and you like these came prior to some other eventual payload, is it like the it seems like one of the things that breaks my brain as a non-intelligence analyst is like trying to figure out how to untangle, like, what is the last thing you expect to see? What's a precursor? I mean, it all sounds like it's very much relative and fairly fluid, right? I think we see, you know, sometimes we'll see a piece of malware used very late stage in an attack, and we'll see some things used very early. Obviously, like some of these big, like attack suites and platforms can kind of like run the gamut. How complicated is that for you to untangle?
Extremely.
Okay.
Very. I mean, that's a big part of the work, right? Is based on our visibility, what's the earliest we can find identifiable, trackable patterns in this activity? And sometimes it means that we actually end up, for example, birding some of this delivery activity, like Saffron Starling is a good example. We saw a consistent delivery methodology, but multiple payloads delivered. So we called that Saffron Starling for our own tracking. So we could get as early as possible in that execution chain. Before we had Saffron Starling, that activity would have looked like precursor activity for Darkgate or for Danabot, which are the threats, some of the threats that Saffron Starling has dropped.
It's a quick sidebar for folks who are maybe just with us for the first time. So you say birding, like the which is a verb here. So that is like taking those color birds, right? Saffron Starling, like we've got Raspberry Robin. There's like a whole bunch of them, and you can find them. You can find them on our like threat index and online. So those are our names for these clusters of activity. When you like for us, educate me for a second. Are those activity clusters, like when you look at those, are they named relative to an attack stage? So for instance, if you saw very similar activity that was very early stage versus later stage, is that like a distinguishing factor when you think about like how to describe those things, name them, track them, and count them for purposes of things like this?
Do you mean like the specific naming scheme?
Yeah. Yeah.
We do have a few that are very kind of casual, but nothing official. So for example, a lot of the worm threats that we have named Raspberry Robin, Tangerine Turkey, Mango Parakeet are fruit colors. Shout out to Lauren Podber, who started that when she was still here. And so sometimes it's, you know, that's kind of the idea behind it. Sometimes like Lilac Lyrebird, that was mimicking a tech support scheme. And lyrebirds are excellent mimics. And so sometimes we do have a little bit of wordplay, or we try to find birds that do reflect what's happening, but not always. Sometimes there's Easter eggs in it, but not all the time.
Nice. All right. Well, all right. So let's kind of move on to one of the ones. So we've talked about Latrodectus here before. You've joined us on office hours to talk about that. It has appeared in the top 10 at least once, maybe more. I've lost track. So let's kind of dig into that, because I think you've seen a little bit of evolution there. It's obvious it is one of these like 3 named precursor threats, and so I think kind of an opportune moment to dig into like what that looks like. And I think this is a great illustrative example when you talk about, you know, like how specific or non-specific some of these different stages can be.
And Latrodectus is interesting. It's been interesting since it first appeared on the scene. And it's interesting because it has been delivered by a variety of different, we've seen different clusters of activity delivering Latrodectus. And the way that Latrodectus executes and delivers has changed over time as well. So whenever these Latrodectus executables pop back up and we can track it, it's always intriguing to see how it's changed. So the activity that we saw last month that put it what would have been in the top 10 started with Cloudflare security verification. So it's not actual Cloudflare, let's be clear. These are malicious sites masquerading as Cloudflare infrastructure, trying to trick users into doing the Cloudflare verification steps, which is yet more paste and run, yet more click, fix. And Legion Loader, one of the other threats that would have been in the top 10, is also using this as a lure, as a way of presenting that initial access or initial execution vector to victims. And the way that we have been seeing Latrodectus, like the initial phases of this execution chain that leads to it, we have interesting cmd.exe commands. We'll talk about detection opportunities for that in just a second. But they're executing multiple commands in one line to go out, pull down external resources, and then write them in specific places. So what we saw was this command pulling down a remote resource, writing it to dcf.log, and then executing that with ftp.exe, which is, I believe, a new set of a new pattern for this particular Latrodectus cluster. And then it goes on to, after, again, it pulls down that resource. It's writing a Latrodectus MSI. Previously, we've seen Latrodectus DLLs, but the initial executable, the first thing that we can say, oh, this is definitely Latrodectus, has been MSI files this past month.
So yeah, like the FTP thing is interesting. I caught that when we were prepping this, and I think it's, you know, like, I mean, curl's kind of always been a mainstay. So that was like kind of a standout. Like, do you have any sense for how often we see ftp.exe used for, like, in any like benign or normal way on Windows systems? Like,
Not off the top of my head. I don't have that kind of baseline standardized data. Dave, do you have any sense of how often this is something that we see on the regular?
You know, I don't. I haven't used FTP in probably 20 years. So yeah, like I see FTP in an enterprise, that would probably make me perk up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
And-
huge, like quick call out for like Surveyor, which is one of our open source projects that I know our threat hunting team and intelligence operations team like leverages heavily for like answering those questions. But like,
Mhm.
I think almost everyone here can go get that and use that, and that like is like one of the killer use cases, is just being able to say like, is this type of thing running in my environment at all? And if so, like, what's kind of the shape of it? Like, what
Mhm.
users are running it? What are the command lines? And like, what's the context, like the lineage look like?
Yeah,
I'd be willing to bet this is like almost non-existent in almost all orgs. And if you see it, you should like immediately throw the flag, right?
So this kind of triggers this feels very similar to the conversation about knowing when you have phishing resistant MFA deployed, right? Everyone's like, deploy phishing resistant MFA, and then remember to turn off the non-phishing resistant stuff, right? We
Mhm.
have other ways to do what we used to do with FTP. Why is it still on our systems anymore? Right? Like why, and it's just part of the distros that goes out. Like, it's there because people have used it, but maybe it shouldn't be.
Mhm. It's a good call out for the baselining. I used to be a whitewater raft guide, and a big part of that is you learn the environment, right? You get a chance to learn the river and what's good, bad, safe, not safe. And you learn that really, really well, so you can avoid the risky areas and also understand how it might change as conditions change. So big fan of baselining in the calm times, so you can figure out what's not right when things look sus.
Yep.
Now I'm adding to the list of contenders for a future AMA, Dave the Mailman Pharaoh, or just like the many lives of Stef Rand. This is like that's cool. That's a very cool experience. I had no idea you were into that.
Thanks. There's a lot of really cool people who work at Red Canary. It's one of my favorite things about being here. All of our Red Talks and the things like people can get up and chat about. It's just.
To be fair, in my journey through the security community, there are a ton of people that have totally unexpected backgrounds and experiences,
Yes.
which make them a ton of fun to talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, people,
Yeah.
lifelong learners, and people who are attracted to unsolvable problems.
You know, I think that the lifelong learning piece really has a big thing to do with it, big part of it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
very cool. All right, back on track. Sorry, I took a little detour there. All right, so we have another an updated detection opportunity. I should have pulled in the ones from some of our past too, but they're out there on YouTube and the blog. But
Mhm.
yeah, so this is like, let's kind of talk through this one. It looks pretty straightforward.
It is pretty straightforward. So this is another one that you may have to baseline a little bit, but it's atypical for explore to execute command that has multiple commands put together into one line. So, like I said, this may be used with some custom tooling in your environment. So, as always, you want to double check and look at context. But in particular, this including HTTP indicates that one of the commands that's being included is reaching out to some kind of resource, probably an external remote resource, which is always worth examining.
Yeah, and so maybe when you kind of talk about that like command chaining, so folks can and probably should even having the HTTP in there is like useful. For an example, it could be almost anything. It sounds like the important part is that you've got Explorer running command and then having a number of like kind of commands or different like routines kind of chained together within that.
That can be used by adversaries to again do a whole lot of things with just one script execution.
So it feels to me like pretty much every initial access or a huge percentage of them start with a command line that involves some kind of call to an HTTP protocol service.
Not uncommon. Some kind of script reaching out. That's
Right.
the popular thing now, is to have downloaders instead of
Yeah. So the question is, I
droppers.
wonder how much of that traffic is ever actually legitimate. I guess a lot of admins do that work, but do we ever do any kind of differentiation between the role of the user that's doing it or the machine that's doing it? Because on an admin machine, that might be normal. On a salesperson's machine, it's not. On an engineer's machine, it might be normal. But, do we do anything like that?
We certainly encourage orgs to take a look at that in their environment. So like, especially for this, if we're sharing it with folks, that would be something to consider. For our own internal detection logic, that would be a really interesting thing to do, is to get some of the, I'm sure you've already had folks from DE, detection engineering, on here to talk about their process. But they could talk about that a lot more in depth, I feel like, and so could some of our threat hunters.
Yeah. I will say from my somewhat dated, but I think like still partially relevant experience on like the DE side, I know for us like that, kind of lump that together under just like organizational intelligence, right? Just like things that either we can infer or know, or that the customer can tell us about their environment. And, we do have very commonly, particularly in, enterprises that are either large or if they've got a pretty mature organization or like fairly complex, a lot of times we'll have them like they'll tag entities like endpoints, identities, things like that. And they'll kind of, we'll sometimes see endpoint tagging that'll tell us, hey, these are developer resources. And like that does allow us, like just on its face, might give us some context, like the customer's trying to tell us, hey, these are software engineers. They're going to do a different profile or shape of thing, salespeople or your accounting team. And in some cases, like we do have the ability, like we have the ability in the platform for them to give us some fairly prescriptive guidance too. So I think that is like, it's one of those areas where that comes into helpful, like our kind of suppression driven workflow, where you can say this thing that would otherwise be terrifying is okay, like on this subset of systems or in this environment because, and that really kind of has been a weapon for scaling threat detection for things like this, because like, no matter how terrible or squirrely some of these things look, every day of the week, you will definitely run into an environment where it's perfectly normal. And so that is like, that's a huge part of the challenge with this stuff, is like admin tooling, automation, systems management, things like that. Awesome. All right. So we've got, we have one more topic that was not included in the docket. And so kind of, Stef, want to tee you up to just share some emerging research. I thought this was super interesting. Like just the fact that you all are able to connect the dots between these things. So, so very interested, like, and we've talked a ton about Stealers here, right? Which is kind of like, fairly vast ecosystem, taking things off of traditional devices, but also like stealing from memory, stealing cookies from browsers. There's like a kind of a long list of things that people want.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I don't know, like set the stage here and kind of like what do you want to share?
So for this specifically, remember last month, we talked about, if y'all looked at the Intelligence Insights, we talked about Poseidon, which appeared last month. And when that did, we included a little disclaimer saying, hey, this is part of a Stealer family that's got a lot of connections and similarities. It can be challenging to tell the differences between them, but we're doing ongoing research into these threats, and we're monitoring to see which one of them we're seeing when we see these threats appear in customer environments. And I think that's interesting because, like I said, last month we had Poseidon Stealer. And this month, one of the threats that would have been in the top 10 if we had not stopped it at precursor activity, was Atomic Stealer, which is the kind of base Stealer family for a lot of Mac OS Stealers that have been active in the last few years. It's very interesting. So when we talk about this family, this Atomic Stealer / Amos family, it started from this original project, this Amos project, and then actually had the code base taken to another individual in Rodrigo, took it and developed additional Stealers based on that Amos code base. So initially we had Poseidon, has since been rebranded as Odyssey earlier this year. And as I mentioned in the insights, and as I mentioned last month, the nice thing is, since they're all closely related, the detection analytics work across the board. So when it comes to differentiating between them, we like to do that for tracking and because we like to know all the things. And we have folks on our team that are doing a lot of research to determine which of them we're seeing and how we should track it best. So last month, Poseidon Stealer made its debut in the top 10. This month, it's best tracked as Atomic Stealer, the activity that we saw. So it's really fascinating. It's fascinating. As we talked about last month, the idea that these can be rebranded, there can be versions of malware, and that makes it harder for defenders in some ways. But like I said, the silver lining is a lot of the same detection analytics work for all of them, no matter what they're called.
Yeah, there's like a finite number of things they have to do, right? They've got to obviously like access data, but to that last point about there's like curl, HTTP posts, FTP, kind of pick your poison there. But like another thing they always have to do is get something back, right? Whether it's for like command and control, exfiltration, you pick it, but like once these things get in, they absolutely have to get stuff out. And so I think that is like that, like taking advantage of that pattern is wild. Yeah, this is fascinating. So like, how, roughly how long have we been tracking on this relationship in general?
Oh gosh, I'd have to go back and take a look at our profiles. We have been tracking Atomic Stealer for quite a while. And we have been following open source intelligence. There have actually been some interviews done with Pinger and with Rodrigo on some different websites. Some folks have actually talked to these developers, and that's why we know a little bit more detail about this development process that happened. And so we've been following that as it's been happening, as information has been available, and as we've been seeing things change in customer environments. And we'll continue to do so. This is still clearly a very successful set of Stealers, a successful Stealer family, and I imagine we'll continue to see it be used and its different parts appear.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's I don't know, it feels like all these threads kind of like intertwine sooner or later. And it is like, Dave, your question earlier about like, these things, just how quickly they can reappear, adapt, reemerge. And like this is a fairly specific example. But yeah, this is awesome research stuff. Thanks for sharing. I know it's kind of early for us, or I guess like maybe not early, but sounds like ongoing.
Yes, ongoing.
We'll look forward to following along, and it'd be super cool if we have any notable updates in the future. I'm certain we'll cover them here. That's very cool.
Absolutely.
This is
And I did want to share that this is yet another thing where we are seeing ClickFix/paste and run. We're seeing the Mac version of that drive a lot of the last month Poseidon and this month Atomic Stealer, which is why we were able to detect it before the Stealer was delivered, because we've got good paste and run and ClickFix detections in place.
That's
Very
awesome.
cool. Awesome.
You know, the interesting thing that's jumping out at me at this is when we talk about risk, like at the business layer, we talk about the impacts that come from things like ransomware landing, right? And it's interesting in talking about this with you all that are on the front lines, actually delivering protection. We're talking about a completely different layer. Like we are talking different languages. And I'm wondering if that's a topic we ought to explore in a future conversation about whether we're even thinking about it at the business layer in a way that's maybe not super constructive, right? Because really, when you're talking about how you invest in protecting the business, we actually have to protect against the precursor activity. That's where all of our focus is,
Mhm.
right? Like, is there value in talking about it in the payload domain, which is really sort of where business risk is more literate.
Be a really, really interesting conversation, especially if you could pull in people across like a lot of different layers
Yeah,
in an org.
right.
I'm always fascinated by like all the dimensions of this stuff, but it is just even, you know, even just understanding like platform targeting, browser targeting,
Yeah, like I wonder
There's
if
a
it
great
makes
level,
sense to pivot the conversation, right? Because at the point we're talking about how do we prevent ransomware, like we're kind of already too late.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So topic for another day.
Yes.
Put that on the stack. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Steph. Again, thank you so much. Always a pleasure having you here.
Great having you here, Steph.
So
I-
much fun. Always a joy.
We like at least the two of us learn a lot every time you're on. Hopefully that's true of everyone else. So thanks everyone for being with us. Appreciate it. Thanks again, Steph, and we'll see you all next week.
See you, everyone.